Ante Pavelić was born on July 14, 1889, in the small village of Bratina in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which at the time was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was born into a modest family of Croatian peasants, and his early years were shaped by the political tensions of the empire, where different ethnic groups sought recognition and autonomy. As a young boy he grew up in an environment where national identity and the struggle for independence were strong themes. This atmosphere influenced him deeply, planting in him a sense of nationalism that would later grow into radical ideology. Pavelić pursued education seriously, eventually studying law at the University of Zagreb. He graduated as a lawyer and entered into practice, but at the same time his interests were not limited to the courtroom. He was drawn into politics, joining Croatian nationalist movements that opposed the central rule of the empire and later the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, which was created after World War I. The kingdom, later renamed Yugoslavia, brought together diverse ethnic groups including Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes under one monarchy dominated by Serbs. Many Croats felt that their identity and political power were being suppressed, and Pavelić became one of the loudest voices against this perceived injustice. By the early 1920s he was active in the Croatian Party of Rights, which had been founded earlier in the 19th century as a nationalist movement. Pavelić quickly rose in influence within the party. His oratory and strong nationalist stance appealed to many Croats who felt betrayed by the political system. He was elected to the Yugoslav parliament, where he became known for his fiery speeches against Serb domination. Pavelić believed that Croats could never have true freedom under Yugoslavia and that independence was the only solution. In 1929 King Alexander of Yugoslavia abolished the parliament, banned political parties, and established a royal dictatorship. This event was a turning point for Pavelić. Convinced that legal and peaceful means could not achieve Croatian independence, he decided to embrace violence and revolution. That same year he fled into exile in Italy and founded the Ustaše movement. The Ustaše, meaning insurgents, was a radical Croatian ultranationalist organization that aimed to create an independent Croatian state through terrorism and armed struggle. Pavelić became its undisputed leader. During the 1930s the Ustaše carried out assassinations, bombings, and subversive activities against Yugoslav authorities. Pavelić was implicated in one of the most notorious acts of political violence of the era. In 1934, King Alexander of Yugoslavia was assassinated in Marseille, France, during a state visit. The plot involved both Ustaše members and Macedonian revolutionaries, and while Pavelić was not physically present, he was accused of being one of the masterminds behind the attack. This led to international condemnation and made him one of the most wanted fugitives in Europe. Despite being convicted in absentia by both French and Yugoslav courts, Pavelić remained in exile, protected largely by Fascist Italy under Benito Mussolini. Mussolini saw in the Ustaše a useful tool to weaken Yugoslavia, which was aligned with France. Thus, Pavelić was allowed to train his followers in camps on Italian soil. During this time he further radicalized his ideology, blending Croatian nationalism with extreme authoritarianism, racial policies, and the desire for a totalitarian state. The outbreak of World War II opened a new chapter in Pavelić's life. In April 1941 Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy invaded Yugoslavia. The kingdom collapsed in just 11 days. In the aftermath the Axis powers carved up its territory, and Croatia was proclaimed an independent state. Hitler and Mussolini turned to Pavelić and the Ustaše to govern the new entity, known as the Independent State of Croatia, or NDH. On April 10, 1941, the state was declared, and soon after Pavelić arrived from exile to assume leadership. Pavelić became the Poglavnik, a title meaning leader, of the new Croatian state. The NDH covered most of modern Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. From the beginning, his regime was characterized by extreme violence, racial laws, and persecution of minorities. Inspired by Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, Pavelić sought to create a homogeneous Croatian nation. He introduced racial laws that targeted Serbs, Jews, and Roma. His government established a brutal system of concentration camps, the most infamous of which was Jasenovac. The Ustaše regime under Pavelić was responsible for mass killings, forced conversions, deportations, and persecution on a wide scale. Historians estimate that hundreds of thousands of Serbs, tens of thousands of Jews, and thousands of Roma were killed during his rule. Jasenovac became a symbol of cruelty, often referred to as the Auschwitz of the Balkans. Survivors recounted horrific stories of torture and execution carried out in the camp. At the same time, Pavelić attempted to strengthen his regime by aligning closely with Germany and Italy. He met personally with Hitler and Mussolini, pledging loyalty to their vision of a new Europe. The NDH became a puppet state, heavily dependent on Axis support for survival. Pavelić tried to portray himself as a strong independent leader, but in reality, his power was tied to the fortunes of Germany and Italy. Within Croatia, he attempted to create a personality cult. His image was displayed across the state, and propaganda painted him as the father of the nation. Schools, youth organizations, and the media were used to spread Ustaše ideology. However, resistance quickly grew, particularly from Serb communities and communists led by Josip Broz Tito. The partisan movement launched a guerrilla war against the Ustaše, German occupiers, and Italian forces. This resistance grew stronger as the war dragged on, and it would eventually play a key role in Pavelić's downfall. By the end of 1943, the tide of the war was turning. Italy surrendered to the Allies, and Germany struggled to maintain control in the Balkans. Pavelić became increasingly isolated, relying almost entirely on German support. His regime faced both external pressure from advancing Allied forces and internal collapse as the partisans gained ground. Despite this, Pavelić continued to enforce his policies of terror, unwilling to relent even as defeat loomed on the horizon. The final years of World War II saw Pavelić attempt to cling to power. He reshuffled his government, tried to strengthen his army, and even appealed to the West for recognition, but none of these measures could save his state. By May 1945, the Axis powers were collapsing across Europe. In Croatia, the partisans launched their final offensives, and the NDH disintegrated. Pavelić, once the self-styled poglavnik of an independent Croatia, now faced the end of his rule. Ante Pavelić was forced to retreat from Croatia as the defeat of Nazi Germany and its allies became inevitable in 1945. The Independent State of Croatia, built upon terror, ethnic cleansing, and totalitarianism, collapsed in the same way it had risen, through violence and betrayal. As Yugoslav partisan forces advanced, Pavelić abandoned Zagreb, fleeing with the remnants of his loyal followers. He disguised himself as a Catholic priest and managed to escape capture, aided by underground networks often referred to as ratlins, some of which were facilitated by elements within the Catholic Church and intelligence agencies of the West who were primarily focused on the coming struggle against communism. He traveled through Austria and Italy, avoiding the hands of Yugoslav authorities who sought to bring him to trial for war crimes. By 1947, Pavelić found refuge in Argentina, where he lived under the protection of Juan Domingo Perón's government. Argentina had become a haven for many former fascists and Nazi collaborators after the Second World War, and Pavelić fit into this shadowed world of exiles. During his stay, he attempted to reorganize the remnants of the Ustaše movement abroad, hoping to one day return and restore Croatian independence under his vision. He created networks among Croatian émigrés in South America and maintained close contacts with sympathetic anti-communist groups in Europe. His focus remained on overthrowing communist Yugoslavia, but he no longer commanded the kind of power he once had. In Argentina, his life was far from peaceful. He survived an assassination attempt in 1957, when gunmen believed to be agents of Yugoslav intelligence attacked him in Buenos Aires. He was gravely injured, receiving gunshot wounds that permanently damaged his health. Fearing further attempts on his life, he left Argentina and eventually settled in Spain, where Francisco Franco's regime provided him with a degree of protection. Spain, under Franco, was one of the last bastions where fascist figures found refuge. Despite his failing health, Pavelić continued to direct Ustaše activities from exile. He remained a symbol for certain Croatian nationalist groups, who regarded him as a martyr of their cause, but his image was deeply stained internationally. To the world, he was considered a criminal responsible for genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. The Yugoslav government repeatedly demanded his extradition, but he was shielded by Cold War politics and the reluctance of Western nations to hand him over. His ability to evade justice became a source of anger for survivors of the atrocities committed under his regime. In 1959, Ante Pavelić's health deteriorated rapidly due to the injuries sustained from the assassination attempt. He was hospitalized in Madrid and died on December 28, 1959, at the age of 70. He was buried in Madrid, far from the land where he had unleashed his reign of terror. His death brought an end to the physical presence of one of the most brutal dictators of the Second World War, but his legacy remained deeply divisive. The aftermath of Pavelić's dictatorship left Croatia and the broader region scarred. The atrocities committed under his command were remembered by survivors of the Jasenovac concentration camp, by Serbs, Jews, and Roma whose families had been destroyed, and by political opponents who had faced brutal repression. His name became synonymous with cruelty and fanaticism. Even decades later, debates over his role in Croatian history stirred controversy, as some nationalist groups tried to present him as a fighter for independence, while historians and international communities emphasized the mass killings and crimes against humanity carried out under his rule. Pavelić's life represented the darkest side of nationalism, where the idea of independence and sovereignty was fused with extreme violence and intolerance. He left behind a fractured memory, one that symbolized both the desperate longing of some Croatians for a state of their own and the horrors of fascism when it was combined with ethnic hatred. His vision of Croatia brought nothing but bloodshed, division, and death, and it collapsed alongside Nazi Germany in 1945. In the broader history of the 20th century, Ante Pavelić stands as one of the figures who embodied the dangers of unchecked extremism. His ability to establish a puppet state under foreign occupation, his role in orchestrating ethnic cleansing, and his survival in exile illustrate how fascist leaders often escaped justice in the post-war world. His regime was remembered as one of the most violent and destructive in the Balkans, and his name is forever linked with genocide and oppression. The story of Ante Pavelić is one of ambition turned into tyranny, of nationalism corrupted into fanaticism, and of a dictator who dreamed of power but left behind a legacy of suffering. His life was a reminder of how fragile societies can become when hatred is turned into policy and when leaders exploit divisions to strengthen their own authority. His death in exile did not erase the pain he had caused, and his regime remained a warning in the history of dictatorships, that the pursuit of power without restraint can destroy entire nations and scar generations.